I've been eating a hyper-carnivore, animal-based, just a really high-fat, meat-based diet for the last 3 years. And today we have Dr. Sabina Solt, who's going to help us go through my blood work results. I also just put together a full food pyramid video where I go more in depth and in detail on what I've been eating over the last few years, which has led to these results. I'll leave that video in the description if you want to check that out. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of let Dr. Sabina take us through.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be back with you, Lillie, and to be going over these results with you. I mean, short version, spoiler alert for, your viewers, really great labs. You're honestly really healthy. But there is a couple little things that we'll go over that could use some tweaking, and it's things that are actually super common in the carnivore space. So this video should hopefully be useful for everyone that's watching it, in addition to telling you some really good insights about your own health. So the first page we're looking at is what we'll call, it's the anemia and nutrition page. This is looking at your iron storage. So the first thing we're going to check up here is we're going to see your ferritin levels. So your ferritin is the storage form of iron. The reference range is 150. You're just outside this reference range right here. You are at 152. For women, though, we usually like to be even less, usually less than 100 for optimal levels. But of course, we see just a slight elevation here. Your circulating iron is great, though. Totally fine. So no signs of any actual anemia, which is a good thing. So your folate levels, which folate is one of your B vitamins, it looks like your folate levels are doing really great. So all good there. Your vitamin D levels were doing pretty good. I know you said that you try to get sun in the summer last time we talked, that you supplement in the winter. You're certainly not deficient by any means. Depending who you talk to, some people will tell you optimal levels are between 50 and 80. It really ultimately depends what you're trying to do. I would say closer to the end of the summer, getting us on that higher end so they get you through the winter is going to be great, but you're not deficient by any means. You're probably doing pretty well with it. Yeah. And your B12 levels are nice and high. I don't know if you're supplementing B12 or if you're just eating, obviously, a lot of red meat, like that's fairly obvious. We know that vitamin B12 is significantly high in red meat. It's a really great source. This is why a lot of vegans end up very deficient in B12 because they simply aren't eating the best sources of it. So first page, ultimately, you're doing really, really great. Next page is the diabetes check. Spoiler alert, no diabetes whatsoever. Your hemoglobin A1C is 5.4, which is nice and low. And then your insulin levels are still nice and low. It's great. What I actually see sometimes, because I know you still will eat dairy and you'll have like random small non-carnivore things that could have sugar in them. I think this is a beautiful place for insulin to be because it means you still have some insulin sensitivity. I've done labs on people who are extremely strict carnivore and their insulin levels actually drop down into the ones or the low twos, which means that if you were going to eat something that went off your diet, you would actually have symptoms presenting as a diabetic, which could be dangerous.
That's something that I spoke with Dr. Robert Sivas, he's the carb addiction doc, and he said something very similar where people, if they have an insulin problem, well, they should be doing high fat to help with balancing that and lowering their insulin. But then what happens is for people who maybe do a really high fat diet for 10 years and they never have any carbs, he starts seeing the opposite thing happen where they need to maybe lower the fat a bit and have a little bit more carbs, maybe temporarily. But just like when we have so much sugar, we have one thing happen with our bloods. Same thing if we have too much fat, we can have one thing happen with our bloods.
Yep, I agree with that. And, there's the whole concept of a quote unquote balanced diet. And while I don't know if you need to balance it with all the colors of the rainbow, so to speak, but I think that there can be a balance based on seasonality or what your macros are at certain times of the day or of the week or of the month. I mean, as women, especially, we're lunarly cyclical, right? Like we have a hormonal cycle that lasts about 28 days. So I don't know if it's optimal for us to always be eating the same amount of fat, same amount of protein every single day when our hormone needs change and our energy needs change. And I think it's always worth being adaptable. And I think that's what should be balanced, is your adaptability to things, not necessarily, all the colors of the rainbow, so to speak.
Right. And I know that can get confusing for people because they want to know, which one should I do? High fat or high carb? And it's going to change.
It's always going to change. And this is why it's so important, I think, just in this community and every community in general, that you really need to teach with the goal to be for people to learn about what feels good in their body, not necessarily what is the best, what's this influencer doing or what should I follow online, because we're all different. We're all built differently. We all have different needs, different goals. But obviously, as we can see with here, what you have figured out for your body over years and years of experimentation it's working.
Right, and I do about like between 2 glasses of milk, a cup of yogurt, and a piece of fruit. I would guess between 50 to 70 grams of carbs, maybe 90 on a day where I'm having more, like if I have a potato or something. But for some people that would be too many carbs. For some people who have an
Totally.
insulin problem, like 50 is a lot. But for people who are metabolically healthy, that is very the results show no blood sugar issues.
Exactly. And this is again, that's such an important point that you bring up, is that it really does depend on whether this is metabolically healthy for you to do. And for you, it clearly is. You have no signs of prediabetes, you have no signs of any insulin resistance, and you're active. And I don't know your actual measurements because I haven't seen you in person, but from what I can see, because there's like waist to hip ratios that you can look at. It's general waist sizes that you can look at. Like, you have all the hallmarks of a person who is metabolically flexible and metabolically healthy. So down into the liver and kidney function panel. So a few things on here we'll go over. We'll kind of chunk these things together. So sodium, potassium chloride, carbon dioxide. The first three are your electrolytes. Carbon dioxide's a gas. All of these are completely imbalanced for you. So no issues there whatsoever. Glucose, your fasting blood sugar is sitting at 95, which is completely normal. And then your BUN, creatinine, EGFR, and the BUN creatinine ratio, all of these are related to your kidney function. So again, completely normal on that. Your kidneys are doing awesome. And we can especially tell that by your EGFR here, which is basically off the charts good at over 90. Calcium levels, your calcium levels were great. Your albumin was just a binding protein, was totally fine. And then we get to these fun ones right here that had slight elevations on it that I'm actually not concerned about at all. So before we even talk about that, I'll tell you why I'm not necessarily concerned. So ALT and AST, these are your liver enzymes. Now they're elevated, right? And people think like, oh my gosh, an elevation liver enzyme. Do I have liver disease? Is my liver failing? You don't drink, like what's happening here? And two things. One, I know you sent me a message and you were like, oh, I was doing great on the intake paperwork until it got to the water intake. And you weren't and you weren't drinking a lot of water. Just dehydration can actually cause your liver enzymes to go up. So that could be what's happening here. The other thing that could be happening here is that excess ferritin that we saw on the first page could be being stored in the liver, causing a little bit of inflammation. Not that big of a deal. If I had to guess, it would be like your 12 ounces of water a day.
Right. So just to give some context, before doing these results with Dr. Sabrina, she sent over a kind of general health form questionnaire where it asks things like, do you use tobacco? Do you drink alcohol? Do you exercise? And I felt very healthy while filling out the form. I'm like, yes, I'm getting like an A+ on this form. Except for at the very end, it asked about water intake and how much water I drink in a day. That's where I had to message her. I was like, I was doing great on the questionnaire until it came to water, because I think, this is, if in a whole day, I probably have 12 ounces of water without electrolytes. So that is the amount of water I have in a day. And I mainly forget to drink water. And it's not until about like 8 o'clock at night where I will drink the 12 ounces of water thinking, oh my goodness, I forgot to drink water. So I definitely need to work on my water intake.
And this is why we have you do the forms, right? Because I always have to be interpreting these in context of what's actually happening in your life. Because otherwise, if I didn't know that about your water intake, it would be super easy to be like, oh my gosh, what the heck is happening with this girl's liver? We need to send her for more tests. We need to get a scan. Like, is she drinking alcohol while she's sleepwalking or something? Like, is something crazy happening that we need to address? Clearly, that's not the case. Chug that water, girl. Keep up with the electrolytes. You're going to be totally fine. I don't anticipate those worsening at all. I don't anticipate any long-term damage whatsoever. It's an easy fix. The liver regenerates itself really quickly. It's actually one of the best organs for self-regeneration. So totally fine on that.
Yep.
And then these last few values down here, the bilirubin, your total protein, alkaline phosphatase, those are also indications of liver function too, which are completely doing fine. And then the osmolality is just the blood concentrations. So, all right, moving on to your thyroid panel. Short version, your thyroid's doing pretty good, but I'm going to like nitpick just like a tiny bit. So I will talk about these values out of order because it's going to make more sense that way. So the first one we'll talk about is the TSH, which stands for your thyroid stimulating hormone. It's a signal that comes from your pituitary gland and tells your thyroid to go ahead and release thyroid hormone. And normally I like this to be at 1.5 or less. So beautiful, like perfect on that. So your body's going to require zinc, selenium, and iodine as micronutrients to take the T4 and then convert it to the T3. Now your T4 levels are pretty good. They're kind of right middle of the road. Your T3 though, a little bit lower than I would like to see it. I didn't catch any low thyroid symptoms on your paperwork, but if you were going to have low thyroid, it would be like cold extremities, constipation, hair falling out, eyebrows thinning, brittle nails, dry skin, cracking skin. If that's not happening, then this level is actually probably fine for you. But one of your actual other levels, your selenium, we're going to get to that one, was on the lower end of the range. So I would say if we wanted to bump up this conversion to get your T3 a little better, that'd be where I would start with that.
So I have dandruff, and I haven't been able to figure out the dandruff thing at all. I have tried literally no plants, no seasonings, no, I don't drink coffee anyway, but like no tea, no fruit, but veggies, like strict carnivore, no bacon, no dairy, no eggs, and I couldn't get rid of the dandruff. In fact, the stricter I became, the more dandruff I had, and I think that was more related to my stress and my cortisol at that point.
Yes.
And then I've had times where I do like more honey, way more fruit, and I have like a limit on how many carbs I can have and how much sugar I can have before my dandruff gets worse. I've heard that like with a fungal condition, that the fungus can feed off of, yes, sugar, but it can also feed off of fat. So I'm just like at this road where I'm like, what the heck do I do with this dandruff? So I haven't been doing anything now that I've tried everything, because I'm like, I just need to, I think, work on lowering my stress first. And maybe that can be, or if you have any other suggestions with the dandruff, but the white, I know we're going to talk about the white blood cell count, maybe selenium.
It could be related to the dry skin that's coming from this thyroid function for sure. And getting this, again, the T4 conversion up to more T3 could help put some of that at bay. And if this hasn't been like a, rock you've looked under yet, worth trying that for a few months for sure. The really good news on the panel is that your anti-TPO, which is a marker of autoimmune thyroid disorders like Hashimoto's, no signs of that whatsoever. So you're totally good on that. It just looks like a little bit of suboptimal conversion happening here, which we know, like, again, based on those other nutrients that we're going to see on when we get to the final pages, makes complete sense and easy tweak.
And I was even connecting the vitamin D, I think, to this as well.
Your vitamin D was good, but you're right. There can be some of that too, as far as making that optimal, but you're also right about the stress too. So I think that next page is actually your hormones. Yes, it is. And so we can dive into these as well. We have all these different hormones. We have the different values, and we have all these charts at the bottom here. The charts are going to tell you where the ranges are based on where you're at in your cycle. So knowing you're probably right around ovulation, which we know the values for estradiol based on this are 41 to 398. Estradiol on here was sitting at 267, probably pretty good. Unless you're getting a lot of PMS symptoms, things like breast tenderness, a lot of weepiness, any crazy mood changes, this is probably an okay level of estradiol for you. If you are getting those symptoms, it might be worth considering something to try to bring that down, but ultimately it doesn't look like it's a bad level at all. And the carnivore people are gonna hate this, but brassicas are a really great option for binding up estrogens. Mm-hmm. So
that can help with the liver enzymes too, the brassicas.
Yeah, yep, exactly. They could. So, and again, there's always this argument that plants can be medicine, and maybe it's not something that you do all the time, but it's like maybe a little bit of broccoli is going to be therapeutic if it doesn't, if it's not always a part of your normal regimen, and you can tolerate it, of course, that it's not going to cause other issues. All right. So your FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. So normal to see this guy go up in ovulation. Your levels are totally fine here. So you're all good on that. Your DHEA, you're on the higher end of the range here, which is awesome. Luteinizing hormone, again, totally fine there. Your sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG, on the lower end of the range, which is good. So you're totally awesome on that. Now your cortisol levels, while they were within range here, they were still creeping up to that higher end of the range. This isn't always a problem for everybody, but if you are experiencing symptoms then it's worth looking at. This could be what is contributing to the thyroid not over converting. This could also just be like a momentary increase in your cortisol because you got a blood draw done. If you don't love needles, there can be that spike if you're nervous right when they're drawing this. So I will talk about this a little bit out of order. One of the things that we check to kind of like check on cortisol to see if it is misbehaving is the prolactin levels. Your prolactin was a little bit high compared to what I would like it to be. So prolactin is the hormone that promotes lactation, and it's normally high in women who are pregnant or breastfeeding because they're getting ready to make milk. When you're not doing those things, you shouldn't really have this being elevated. So normally I would like to see this like below 10 in somebody who isn't going towards that. So you can see you're kind of creeping up towards that higher end of the range, which does tell me that yes, there is some high cortisol happening in your life in general and some stress in your life in general that we may want to go into.
Yeah, I just recorded a video where I said, hey, you know, on average, I would say my given day, I'm like a 7-8 most days of my stress out of 1 through 10, 10 being high, like a good 7-8. So we got some books to read. We do massages. We try, but I definitely think it like comes from my past, having like more of like the anxiousness, like I need to stay busy. I don't know if you've heard my story about my past, but like I was involved in like everything with school, so I wouldn't have to go home and be a part of like my home life. So I still like, that's a habit, a learned habit where I need to be go, busy, 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 talk faster, move quicker, get more done. And I've been trying to be okay, let's slow down. We don't have to have that same fight or flight running around all the time. And so I know that, yeah, the cortisol I was not surprised with.
Well, and it's tricky, right? Because our brains and our bodies, ultimately, the whole goal is that it's trying to keep us safe. And sometimes what it feels is safe is simply just what's familiar to it, even if that's not what's serving our highest good, right? So if it's familiar to you to be in that hustle and bustle and go, and not to mention you don't have an easy job by any means, you're always on, you're always having to be thinking of things, you're always having to be creative. So it's like to see that it's actually not worse than this. I'm actually, not proud of you, but like it could be worse. It definitely could be worse just based on what you have going on in your life. So yes, taking those moments to slow down is definitely important. Another thing that you might want to consider, especially if there was a lot of trauma in the past, is doing something called somatic exercises. And I can send you some resources on that. But it's basically very gentle exercises that help your body to release stress and trauma so that you can actually just calm and settle down. Breathwork is a really great option for that. And then I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza and any of his books or content. Amazing for kind of retraining that brain just to think differently about things too. So starting there, because ultimately, like, yes, we could, treat the high cortisol and treat that, but getting to the root cause, which is removing those responses and removing the body's desire to go into fight or flight, is going to be far more potent long term.
So just to clarify too, I really highly doubt that this is anything related with my diet necessarily. I do think this is more so just like me as a person needing to simmer down a little bit.
Yes. And that is such a great point to bring up, is that not everything is diet. Not everything about your health is related to your diet. Therefore, picking the perfect diet won't automatically solve all your problems. So yes, you bring up an amazing point. I think it's so important to drive home that you are still a whole person outside of your diet, and you've had experiences and you have other things going on, and those can all impact you. So yes. All right. Testosterone levels, your testosterone was doing really good. You probably have plenty of energy. It's probably good for you, like easy enough for you to put on muscle, have good workouts, like amazing. So I'm really happy with that. And of course, your free testosterone was really good, about halfway through the mid-range, the reference range. Awesome. Love it. Your progesterone levels were pretty good. They probably could have been a little bit higher if we're looking at this reference range. Your cycles, are they fairly regular?
Yeah, unless I'm about to get married and be stressed out, but otherwise, yes.
Yes. So we can see a decrease in progesterone and some awkward cycle stuff happening in the presence of stress because of how hormones can go down different pathways. So there is a way that your body will kind of bypass making progesterone in order to favorably make cortisol. So that can impact how you experience your cycles. That might be something to pay attention to. But again, if it is just related to stress, this stuff can self-correct over time with just getting to that root cause. And then the dihydrotestosterone, your dihydrotestosterone, totally fine. Lower end of the range is good. Okay, so other markers. So a couple things that we check here. So we check uric acid levels because people will want to tell you that you're eating all this meat and you're going to get gout. And it's just, it's very, I see it very, very rarely. Not that I haven't seen it in carnivores, I absolutely have, but it's usually in people who also have the MTHFR defect and who also have very, very elevated ferritin. So there definitely is a connection with that. Your levels were still up on the higher end of the range, which again could be related to that ferritin level that we saw earlier, but overall, not worried about it. Your magnesium levels are doing great.
I'm so happy when I saw that. I was like, yes. Ooh, I am so happy to see my magnesium levels and all of my electrolytes being in balance. I've heard that over 70% of Americans are deficient in particularly magnesium. And so this is something that I'm very aware of, and I do supplement with different forms of magnesium, though one of my favorite ways to get in extra electrolytes is through a drink mix called LMNT. It's a really clean ingredient brand for electrolytes with no sugar or artificial ingredients. I just put this package into my water and milk each day, and it adds more magnesium, also potassium and sodium into my diet. And I have noticed how much they have helped me personally with staying hydrated, with my eye twitching, and with muscle cramping. LMNT will actually send you a free sample pack. The sample pack comes with 8 packages of all their different flavors. You can claim this free sample pack with any order by going to the link in the description or by going to the URL drinklmnt.com/Lillie Kane.
Iodine, your iodine levels are pretty good. So this isn't where the iodine isn't where I would look for you to be increasing your thyroid function. It's going to be when we get onto the next pages. Cardiac health panel. This is where everybody loves to freak out when it comes to carnivore labs. And you got really great stuff happening here. Your total cholesterol 215. I love it slightly above 200. There is some evidence that this does correlate better with longevity, overall cognitive function, hormone function, all the really good stuff that we love it to do. Beautiful. Your LDL is quote unquote high, but we know that this actually doesn't have any bearing on your general cardiac health. And we see the evidence of this in additional values over here that we'll dive into. The coolest thing on your panel here is the HDL to your triglyceride ratio. At the very least, we want the ratio to be about a 1-to-1. So even if your triglycerides were at 75, you'd still be good, but you're almost at a 2-to-1 ratio, which is amazing. LDL direct is just another way of calculating the LDL calculation that you see up here. So these are always pretty much equal to each other, roughly the same. We look at your apolipoproteins. These are transport molecules that can move cholesterol around the body. Totally fine on all of those. Again, the ApoB being elevated is just a direct correlation to your LDL being slightly up. But because all these inflammatory markers that we see down here and everything under the inflammation section is completely fine, we know there's actually no problems whatsoever. And so under that inflammation section, as you're seeing here, we looked at a number of different things to check for general inflammation. And this is what I would say if somebody is in the carnivore space and they've got a wild cholesterol panel their doctor is freaking out about. It is not worth freaking out until you look at these other markers, because this is going to tell you a much bigger picture. So I'm going to talk about these a little bit out of order so it makes more sense. An HSCRP is a marker of just generalized body-wide inflammation. You have almost none. Almost none. It's like that slight, like the 0.2 is probably just from you working out, because there's always going to be a tiny bit of damage that occurs after a workout. And that's probably where that's coming from. Homocysteine, this is related to your methylation or your energy production pathways. You're totally fine there too. Your oxidative LDL, this would be an indication if you were eating a lot of bad fats or if you were eating a lot of meat that has been charred, which obviously you're not. So you're not creating that literal oxidative or very bad damaging fat in your system, which is amazing. And then this one down here, your MPO. This stands for myeloperoxidase. And this is a marker of cardiac damage. So we know for sure, no, really none happening here for you. So completely fine there. And then your PLAC, if this had a significant elevation, it would tell us that cardiac repair was happening too. So you have no inflammation, you got no damage, nothing really needs to be repaired. You're doing awesome on that. And then these other lipoprotein markers here, Again, these are just additional indicators of if there was going to be some cardiac damage happening or some cardiac repair happening, these would be elevated. So the small density LDL and your lipoprotein A. But overall, it's a beautiful panel, like so good.
Of course, there's so many different opinions, and I look and I hear things online too, and so even for myself, it can get confusing on what's the right thing. I think if I had to pick one thing that I would want to work on, I would say probably my ApoB, and I would want it to be like maybe around 80 or less. I don't know if you have any thing against it being 80 or less, but at least from what I've been listening to, it just sounds like that would be a better range. So maybe if I were to move into like, still could do high fat, just maybe more monounsaturated fats. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Again, my thought process on ApoB has more to do with what does your whole cardiac picture look like? Because if your ApoB had that elevation and we were actually seeing the inflammation coming from your heart, we might want to consider paying attention to that. At this point, in my opinion, pending you don't get something like go get a CAC scan or an echocardiogram, like something else to look at that, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But if you want to experiment, maybe we, test again another 6 months, see what that does for your system. That's cool too. But again, you're doing great.
Okay.
Your CBC, complete blood counts. So a CBC is going to look at all of your blood cells, your red blood cells, your white blood cells, different types of white blood cells, different sizes of your cells, your platelets, all of it. I'm not necessarily worried about your low white blood cells. They could be from stress, could be related to the vitamin D, could be related to so many things. But what we have to pay attention to is that, so your white blood cells slightly low, but all of your white blood cell counts, so your neutrophils, your lymphocytes, your monocytes, those are all still normal. So you still have a full population of working and functioning blood cells, meaning there isn't actually any impact to your immune function or how you'd be able to fight something off. And sometimes people can just have these transient decreases, and it's not a big deal. Again, as long as everything else is perfectly fine, which it is. So it's not so far off of what the reference range is that I'm not really concerned about. Is again, it could still just be stress. You can be eating the most perfect diet, but if your stress levels are so high that you're shredding your intestinal lining because of all that excess cortisol and you're not absorbing the food or the nutrients anyway, and you're causing dysbiosis, and like maybe now you're developing candida, like all these things can happen because of stress. And I feel like we just kind of brush it off as a society right now, like, oh yeah, we're all stressed out. No, I do not want that to be the norm for people. Like, get rid of it.
Right. Well, it's way easier for people to say, hey, what should I change with my diet? What should I eat? Tell me what to eat, Sabrina. I want to know that. Not tell me to work on my stress, because that is like the real work. That is the hard stuff, is working on the stress. Telling me to change what I'm eating, done. But the stress part, that is like a constant practice. It's work that we have to put in, because we're constantly being bombarded in our ears and our eyes and all over our space to go faster, compare ourselves on social media. There's so many different layers and factors nowadays where we have to literally work as a job to get those things out of our space.
Yeah, it's tough. And again, there's other little things that compound with that will increase our stress. Like you said, we're on our devices, we're on our phones. That constant blue light exposure will 100% increase your cortisol. And we have studies to prove this. So it's not, and if you're looking at a device a few hours a day, even right before bed, you're causing these cortisol spikes. And cortisol, don't get me wrong, it is completely useful when we need it, but the rest of the time, we should be keeping it as low as possible. And like, I'm guilty of this. This is why I preach it. Like, I have had high cortisol levels before. I have lived in high stress states. So like, I am speaking to myself as I'm saying this, and I'm speaking from deep experience in this field. Like, it is something that is worth your time to do. And this is why I love Joe Dispenza's work, because part of it just starts with thinking about how you view yourself and understanding your thoughts, and how you can just kind of surgically intrude right then and there to get yourself on a new path. So I love that. I love that work. So we'll see here with zinc. We'll start with zinc. Your levels were super high, which isn't a bad thing. Muscle meat is a really great source of zinc, and obviously you're eating plenty of it. Now, zinc is a great mineral, great for mental function, for immune function. It's just a fantastic mineral, but we do want to make sure that zinc is always in a great ratio with copper. These guys travel together. They do signaling, like we have to make sure. So now, even though your copper levels were good, if we have a deficiency in that copper to zinc ratio, that will actually increase your body's sequestering of iron into stored ferritin. So this kind of like closes our loop on the very first page when we saw that elevated ferritin as to why could this be happening. This is the reason right here. So without telling you to decrease zinc, which I don't necessarily want you to do because you're still getting all the other great nutrients from eating that muscle meat, but focusing on sources of copper. So seafood is going to have a great deal of copper. You could simply take a copper supplement if you want to kind of like bypass that and just get that in your system, rebalance things for you. But this could also be why you could be having some of that dandruff issue, because there can be some skin health stuff related to copper too. Hair growth stuff, like that can all be related as well. So something to consider there. And then your selenium levels. This is what I was talking about when it came down to your thyroid function. So again, you're certainly not deficient. You're just kind of right above deficiency level, but you're certainly not in that optimal range. So this to me could be why you're still getting okay conversion, but to bring that up to the next level, getting some more selenium in your system is going to be beneficial. Like I said, we spoiled it at the beginning, like you're doing so great. It's just like minor little tweaks. And it's things that I've seen in carnivores consistently almost, because again, a lot of us are focused on the muscle meat intake, and I've seen that ratio go off. I've seen that ferritin go up. It's completely fixable. And again, just better, you can maintain those changes long term with just adding in the foods that are going to give you those nutrients.
The specific blood panel I got done was called the Comprehensive Carnivore. I got it right off of Dr. Sabina Solt's website, stemcelltherapypro.com. And Dr. Sabrina is going to be on maternity leave until the fall, though her team knows how to analyze and interpret blood panels in the way in which Dr. Sabrina would. So if you're interested in getting blood work done, I'll leave a link to Dr. Sabrina's website in the description. Also, that's where you'll find her contact information, her Instagram, YouTube, and all the ways in which you can ask her more questions and follow along with her journey. Don't be silly, subscribe to Lillie, and I'll see you in the next one.